Hi, Dustin here with Dustin's Dollars, and I'm back once again. Going to talk about Knightscope today. We are going to talk about their gross losses that they currently have, and I'm going to give some of my sort of what we know about that, and then some of my thoughts and speculations on, how they might turn this into a gross profit, as we obviously all, everyone who is long the company wants them to. Before I begin, for real, let me read this. I am not a financial advisor or a financial professional of any sort. All opinions I express in this video are mine and do not represent those of any company or any other individual. I may own investments in some of the companies discussed in this video. I do own shares of Knightscope. I have a long position in Knightscope. So basically, this should be for your entertainment only because I could be wrong about everything I say in this video. You need to do your own research before making any investment decisions. All right, so on to Knightscope and their gross loss. So real quick, we are going to hit the numbers. This is, as I've referenced before, their most recent numbers, which are from the end of June of 2021, right? The first 6 months of 2021. And I am eagerly awaiting them to file their next report. Now that they're a public company, we should get those quarterly, I hope. But this is what we have to work off of right now. And with these most recent numbers, right, you can see it is right here. Hopefully that's large enough for you to see, but the revenue was about $1.8 million. The cost of services was about $2.5 million, which, do the math there, and they actually lost $740,000, before you even talk about any OpEx. So their gross profit margin was negative 42%, which is abysmal, right? That's horrible, right? They if you just look at these numbers and you extrapolate, it would tell you that, gee, the more sales they make, the more money they are losing before we even consider the OpEx, right? We're not talking negative, a net loss. We're talking a gross loss here. And clearly this is a situation that they have to fix. So what we're going to do today is dig into this at least as much as we can from the information that we have, and think about and see what's been said in their filings, and then, talk about what could potentially happen to change this. So, the first thing here that I've mentioned this a bit in the past, they could obviously just raise prices, right? Like, and I think this is a pretty obvious one that they will eventually do. Although I'm guessing right now they're really going for growth, and so they want to make their products as attractive, in terms of pricing as possible, because they can, right? They have cash, as I calculated in prior video. I think they have about 12 months worth of runway, even at their current at these cash burn rates, which is obviously very high, and maybe they could optimize that a little bit. But if they just, they could match their revenue to cost of services if they rose their prices by 42%. And that takes the number that they like to quote a lot, is sort of the security guard equivalent, right? The cost per hour of their robot. If you were thinking about a security guard, and they like to say that their robots are between $3 and $9 per hour, per robot. And I think that, I think that depends on which model of the robot you get. But 42% increase would change those numbers to be, about $4.25 to $12.75 an hour, which are honestly, in today's labor market, right, where you hear a lot of people can't get workers, and I think especially, and as wages are rising, there's probably turnover increase in some of these very low paying jobs, like some of these security guard positions. I could certainly imagine that even at $12.75 an hour, it's still significant savings for any company that would be doing some cost benefit analysis. So I think that's at least one possibility. But I mean, that's the easy one. They could always raise prices, and clearly I don't know how elastic the market is, right? I don't know how many of their clients would cancel if the prices were risen. And 42% is a big jump. I can't imagine they would do that all in one time. And even still, 42%, that gets you so you have you're neutral in terms of your gross margin is zero, right? And it really needs to be positive. So it would really need to be much larger than that. And again, to offset all of their OpEx and to finally get some positive net income, to do it strictly through price increases at the current rate, like they'd have to raise prices way more than 42%. So, I just mentioned that because, it's the obvious one, but we're going to go through now and talk about how they can reduce that cost of services, because that's really where where their scaling is going to happen, I think. So let's go through that. And I mean, the first question that you might ask is, what exactly is included in Knightscope's cost of services? So I pulled it up here. And they call it out here, right? It consists of routine maintenance, depreciation, third-party software licensing costs, deployment-related costs, the robot communications costs, data storage costs, and facilities allocations, plus direct and indirect compensation and benefits. So that tells you what is in there. I'm going to go through those in just in a couple minutes, in more detail, and give my thoughts on each one of those. But what I want to talk about first is sort of how big each one of those components is. And unfortunately, the answer is we don't know. We don't know any of those costs except for depreciation. They did actually list this one out. They said for the 6 months ended June 30th, 2021, the depreciation amount that was included in the cost of services was $671,000, right? So that tells me that 27% of their cost of services was from robot depreciation. And that was actually surprising to me, surprisingly low. Because, here I'm thinking that the majority of the cost is the robots themselves. But it's actually 27% of the cost of services. And I view that as a very, very good sign. The reason why that is because we know this is clearly one of those variable costs out of that cost of services. We know that depreciation expense is going to scale upwards for as many robots as they have deployed, right? So that one only being 27% of the cost of services means that, we have that opportunity that some portion of the remainder of the 73% of that cost of services are going to be more like fixed costs and are not going to scale linearly, with revenue. So that was really good to hear. When I saw that, and I actually dug in here. One thing that I'm not sure, and this is a bit of a tangent, they talk about their unit economics on the robots and how they have to pay obviously all the costs of the robot up front, all the materials and all the assembly, and then once it's deployed, they have to maintain it, but that you don't have to build a new robot every year, even though you're getting recurring revenue as long as the client renews. And it's not completely clear to me how they track that in all of this, because it's not obvious to me if they're marking depreciation as their cost of services. Are some of these costs of services not actually cash coming out of their pocket, right? If they're just calling it depreciation on the robot, it will eventually be a cost when they have to replace the robot 5 years in the future. But it's very relevant very relevant for years 2, 3, 4, and 5. Maybe 2, 3, and 4. They do talk about the lifetime of the robots being 3 to 4.5 years, and I imagine that probably just varies by model. But in those additional years past the first year, they obviously don't have to build a new robot. But if they're still charging roughly the same depreciation expense, that might actually be a major positive in terms of their cash flows. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, so let's the one other thing before I go in and give my thoughts on each one of those components of the cost of services. They do actually have a small section here addressing the gross loss, and I wanted to pick out just a couple things from this. They say that as the business scales and becomes more streamlined, management expects gross loss to decrease once a critical mass has been achieved. And as a side note, I had some old investor materials, which I'm sure are out of date by now, but in the past they had projected that they would need about 300 machines in network to hit positive EBITDA. And I imagine that number is probably higher nowadays, because I think the company has grown as they've tried to do more and more things. But that's probably a pretty good rule of thumb that maybe somewhere around 300 they might start having positive EBITDA. And so that's interesting to think about, just as a just a number to get thrown out there. And again, my current estimate is that they're somewhere around 110 deployed at the current moment. Sorry, under contract, not deployed. I think we're probably just above 90 deployed from the public information that we've gotten, the little trickles. So they're obviously a ways from that, but a couple couple years of 50 to 100% growth, and they'll be there in no time. So a couple more things here in this paragraph. They do say that they expect that as the company matures, they will attain expertise, economies of scale, and efficiencies that will both increase revenue and reduce costs over the medium to long term. Their ASR, right, the robot material sourcing, production, assembly, and manufacturing are expected to become more efficient over time, and the costs associated with those processes reduced as they grow. And that just makes sense, right? The same people who are ordering parts are ordering larger batches of parts. They're able to get, by ordering larger batches or maybe ordering batches more frequently, they don't have to put up as much. Maybe they can sign contracts with these folks to have, standing agreements, get better unit pricing on those components. One negative that is buried in here is they do say that they've experienced an increase in a minimum, minimum order requirements. Sort of due to COVID. At least they call it out there. So I think that's obviously a negative for them, and something they say it could persist through 2022 and 2023. But maybe that the impact of that is lessened as they grow, right? That's certainly what we hope. And sorry, they actually say this here somewhere that they think they'll be in a better position to negotiate volume-based pricing terms with suppliers as they grow, and this is another key one: optimize their designs for designs for assembly and design for service. And so I think that is actually a big part of the thesis, and they've talked about having this 5th generation K5. If you they don't say much about it here. That's really all they say, I think. But they've alluded to this in other places where they've said that that's one of the big things that they are optimizing for with the 5th generation is actually not necessarily a bunch of new features on the robot, although I'm sure that they have them, but they're optimizing the design to reduce costs, for assembly and then for maintenance. So that's that's pretty good to hear. And they have a couple other sort of general notes that they think they're going to build new internal tools that are going to reduce costs. And they have other cost reduction initiatives. They're pretty vague on that, so I don't know how much faith to put in that. But so if we do go back to just these components here that they have, I think I think we can at least speculate about which one of these are fixed and which one of these are variable, right? Routine maintenance, that's obviously going to be variable. The more robots you have deployed, the more maintenance you're going to have to do. However, that sort of gets back to that design. I think, as they iterate and have new generations of the robots, they're probably going to, incorporate lessons from what they've had deployed out in the field. And, hopefully they'll need less maintenance per robot over time due to that. I already talked about depreciation. That's going to scale pretty linearly. Sorry, my throat is really bad. Third-party software licensing costs. I don't know for sure, but I'm going to guess that's more of a fixed cost. Because I think, that seems like something they would get a license for and then be able to use on all their robots. I don't know. Maybe they have to pay per robot, but it's hard to say. Then we have a couple of these, I'm going to jump ahead. The communications, data storage, those are probably pretty variable, right? Like more robots means more data and more communication is going to have to happen. So that probably just scales with the robots. Although I would speculate that those are probably not large components of their costs. I don't know, but I would just guess, bandwidth and data tends to be, I think would tend to be cheap compared to some of the other things we're talking about here. Deployment related costs. We have that. We also have the facilities, compensation benefits. These to me, obviously you're going to have the deployment cost each time you deploy a robot, but I think some of this is also what staff do we have on hand to do deployments, right? What equipment do we have on hand to do deployments? And those, staff and that equipment that is that is used for that process, those feel like the fixed costs to me. And one thing to keep in mind, they are located in Mountain View, California. That is a very, very expensive area. Even their, some of their lower lower, rank and file employees that are doing deployments, doing assembly, they're probably not cheap, compared to most of what you think about labor rates in the U.S. So that's at least something to consider. Some of those might be fixed, fixed costs more or less. Obviously, they would grow to some degree, but one person doing a job that's only utilized 10% of the time right now could scale up 10x before they really have to increase that cost. Same for the facilities, right? Like whatever space they have that they're using for these. At least that's how I interpret it. It's pretty vague, right? Facilities allocations. I'm not sure I could come up with much of a more vague term myself, but that is what it is. So some of this is also going to be for, I imagine, they'll probably have support staff, right? And they talk about this Knightscope. Where's it at? There we go. The Knightscope Network Operations Center, right? And these are, people who are monitoring the health of the robots, making sure that everything is happening properly, so that they know when to go maintain the robots and those sorts of things. They call it out right here. It's staffed 24/7 by the company in the U.S. I can imagine that's the sort of thing that that is a fixed cost, more or less. That, as long as most of the robots are operating reasonably well, that's probably a very underutilized set of folks, in terms of they could probably handle maybe 10 or 100 times as many robots with the same amount of staffing. So that's going to probably be much more of a fixed cost. Now, just one other interesting thing that I wanted to call out before I do hop off, because I think it's very, very relevant to talk about margins. That is the Knightscope Plus service that they have added, and they've actually, I think, they've publicly announced that they've sold this to 2 different clients. Right, and this is where, in addition to deploying the robot, Knightscope can also be the ones who are monitoring what the robot sees and making decisions of when they should dispatch police, when they should, I don't know, broadcast a message to somebody who's there on property, whatever. And that probably uses those same folks who are in that Knightscope Network Operations Center. Maybe it's, again, my speculation. Maybe they're 2 different sets of folks, but as you can imagine, or I would speculate that the margins on that Knightscope Plus subscription are probably way higher than the margins for the robots, because obviously there's no physical hardware involved, so that cuts off a whole bunch of the costs there. So I think if that becomes a material service that they sell in terms of percent of the robots that have the Knightscope Plus subscription attached, that could be huge for their margins. I would speculate they might be able to get 80% margins, gross margins out of that. So, obviously I'm making up that number, but just to illustrate that, I think it could probably be way higher than the hardware. When you're talking about software style margins. So, all right, that is what I wanted to say, and I hope that shed some light on some of the folks who are. I got a couple comments on like, hey, Knightscope has negative gross margins. How could you possibly think this is a good investment, right? And this is me explaining, I think that they are going to flip that, right? And they're going to end up making a gross profit in time, and hopefully this video explained to you some of my thinking on how I believe that they can do that. So thank you for watching.